At this point, there's been so many breakdowns to the tail of the tape, I don't think there are any other comparisons left, and we're way past any debates. For every advantage, there seems to be a disadvantage. For every attribute, there seems to be a flaw. It doesn't matter what you say. Crawford is faster, Spence is stronger. Spence is more fundamentally sound, Crawford's more skillful. Crawford can switch stances, Spence has a better jab. Spence has the better defense, Crawford has better footwork. Crawford's a better counterpuncher, Spence is more durable. Spence is bigger, Crawford has a better IQ. Crawford stopped Brooke and Porter, Spence took both of their belts. It doesn't matter, okay? The double-edged sword gets so intense that even Destiny and Faye have fans trying to figure out a back and forth. You know, some believe Crawford belongs in the 80s, while others believe Spence is from the 90s. Not too far-fetched given the years each of them were born. Talk about Terminator 1 and 2, huh? If fans bring up Spence's car wreck, others will bring up Crawford being shot in the head. From one being on the other side of the street and doubted by fans for years, to the other rising to the occasion every big moment he's had, only to be the betting underdog. If a dance partner was ever meant to be, Spence vs. Crawford would have to go something like irresistible force meets unremovable object. You can't have one without the other. This is basically what Tank vs. Ryan Garcia was promoted to be, but on paper actually is 50-50. The matchup is so tooth and nail close that, like Davis and Garcia, if we take one fighter from this matchup, for instance Terrence Bud Crawford, and we map out a pathway for victory or a key to begin this bout, because like Tank, everyone points out how Crawford can be a slow starter. If Crawford starts off slow, it can still benefit him in a lot of ways. For instance, everyone knows Spence is coming forward for sure. I mean, he said it himself in an interview with Stephen A. He know I'm stepping. So if you're Crawford, some will say, let Spence tire himself out with his relentless approach, wear him down. That way, after you time him, you can catch the big fish just like you catch everyone else with something he might not see coming, forcing him on his back foot or into retreat with like a hook, cross, or uppercut. And since Crawford is the superior counterpuncher, I'm sure no one is doubting the threat he possesses on his back foot or throwing in between punches and during exchanges. This is where all the simplicity goes out the window though. Being that Errol Spence has one of, if not the best jabs in the game, I'm sure Spence will look to establish that jab before he decides to come in all guns blazing, because if anyone thinks Spence is gonna do what he did against Sean Porter, like Timothy Bradley says, lunging in, yeah, nah bruh. You already heard Crawford let it be known that if he gets out of line, he will be number 11. And trust, Spence knows he has to stay disciplined. Therefore, if Crawford doesn't display some dominance early on, at least enough to keep Spence honest, he would not only allow Spence to get into rhythm or groove, but also mount up on offense using the stick and gaining enough leverage to walk Bud down while racking up a lead on scorecards. Remember, Spence never neglects the body, so he will follow up most of his attacks to the body, even if it means he has to pot shot or body blow his way through. This is where the collage starts though, since every argument for either fighter's case can very well be contradicted and deflected in this tug of war. If Bud decides to take the fight to Spence early and they really make it a hockey fight, well then, he would be right in Spence's backyard, and we all know Bud has that dog in him, just like Spence has that dog in him. Only thing about it is starting out fast the best approach when he has to maintain fighting at a pace Spence is already so used to fighting at? Because Spence's work rate is what I would call the snowball effect. It's like a volcano. He just builds up more and more momentum the longer the fight goes on. Dude is literally the juggernaut in there. And because Crawford, who has blazing speed and an IQ that can improvise on the fly, aka since Nightcrawler likes to fight in spurts, being in there with a guy who can cause so much disruption and produce so much activity, I don't know if trying to make his presence felt right away against Spence would be the brightest idea, because since Terrence does fight in spurts, he won't have much time to think, let alone breathe. But he will have to close the gap on that Spence jab early on, and this is why the durability is a factor and an advantage for Errol Spence. Everyone says Bud has a toolbox, so I expect Team Crawford to have some traps set up along the way for the big fish. I mean, for starters, since Bud is better at mid-range and has a 2-inch reach advantage, I can see him deliberately establishing his own jab while trying to overshoot Earl's jab. And if you watch Bud, you know he's no stranger to anything like that at all. He's very good at it. I mean, on paper, there are so many things Crawford can do to frustrate Spence. Since this is indeed a bull versus matador type of situation, he can bait Spence in using feints, speed, and movement. I mean, Crawford is more than likely the favorite because a lot of folk are expecting him to walk Earl into something, and I'm sure it will be no surprise to most of us if we see Crawford having some big moments in this fight. With Spence being the natural southpaw and Bud being ambidextrous, Crawford can eat from the orthodox stance if the game plan is right, because the switch is real. Like, he actually flips a switch and goes into another round. So I can really see a situation where we see Spence look vulnerable and actually be in trouble here. Basically, don't be surprised if there are some rounds or moments in rounds where you see Crawford fucking Spence up. For real. Keep in mind though that Spence has the better defense of the two here, because although he's been hit, Bud has had his fair share of getting touched up, whether that be because of his ego or due to him fighting with his hands down. Spence has a very tight guard at the end of the day, which is why the handicap ultimately always evens out when breaking this fight down stylistically. People also gotta ask themselves, what does this fight really look like when it does turn into southpaw versus southpaw? Listen, you really gotta think about it. I'm sure it will most likely start to take place anywhere between the 4th or 5th round, if we even make it that far. But if so, does that really benefit Bud in this case, or will it just make Spence feel that much more at home? And if the switch jams on that Glock, what does Crawford do then? That's almost equivalent to Spence's jab being taken away, some Easter eggs that we must keep an eye out for. And although everyone assumes that a toe-to-toe phone booth fight favors Spence, since that is his thing, we have to be mindful that Earl is a lot more stationary than Crawford is. Crawford has the better footwork and better punching placement. Also, given Crawford's acceleration in the event that they are having exchanges, which they definitely will be, look for who would have the advantage in a hooking contest. Because we all know in boxing they say you never hook with a hooker, and that can definitely get ugly with guys like Spence and Crawford on the headhunt or dig to the body. Bud's knockout ratio speaks more than enough to his testament of strength and power. The man has stopped every welterweight he's faced, and Spence is known as the eye collector. This dude puts guys in the hospital. Crawford is perceived to be the more versatile boxer, but Spence has also shown range in various fights, which makes one beg the question, have we not seen everything in the boxing arsenal of Errol Spence Jr.? You know how everyone keeps mentioning the toolbox, Crawford's toolbox. Now, although some believe Spence isn't great at boxing, I'm sure his fights against the Garcias say otherwise. It's just because Spence hasn't really been in a situation where he's had to make any serious adjustments, and because no one has been able to bring that out of him. Is it because he doesn't have it, or is he really just that good at plan A? I've pointed out before how Spence has underrated footwork and is a better counterpuncher than people like to give him credit for. But the same way I'm anticipating to see Crawford go to Spence's body and test Spence somewhere he hasn't been tested, another Easter egg that should be highlighted, can we see a situation where Errol Spence Jr. is actually blatantly forced to think and play chess? We do know that both guys say they're sticking to what they do best, meaning Spence just has to be him, dictate the pace and establish the jab, stay busy and keep something going on, keep touching him. He likes to impose his will, and we already know fight, fight, fight until he breaks you down or puts you in survival mode, but he knows how to mix it up sometimes, slowing the pace down and turning it up randomly to the point where it's harder for guys to figure him out or outthink him. Crawford has a Mayweather-like formula, but the difference is Floyd would take away what you did best and then do what he did best. Thing with Bud is, once Crawford learns your weaknesses, he likes to try other things and saves that for the grand finale of some sort, especially if you make him mad or get him worried. Which is why he catches guys with ridiculous shots that they don't see coming, and why he might be confident, being that, like Rolly Romero pointed out, he just might know something that we don't. Fans, spectators, and experts can say what they want though. At the end of the day, this one can play out so many different ways, there's no telling what will actually happen. That's why it's yin and yang, because it makes this a classic matchup on paper. The only downside of that is there's a possibility due to the styles that it could be a one-sided affair, eliminating the chances of it living up to the hype. Small chance, but I highly doubt it. Remember though, Spence hasn't fought in a year and 3 months. Last guy that was out for a year and 3 months was Shawn Porter when he was stopped by Terrence Bud Crawford. Also, Crawford's legs, if they look anything like they did in his last fight against David Evanesian, barring any injury to any of them, we have to consider every dynamic. Picturing what this actual bout will look like is a tall task, but that's why July 29th is fixing to be a movie. Given Earl's high work rate and consistency, it would only make sense that a decision would more than likely favor Spence, while a stoppage would favor Crawford due to the fact that Crawford has stopped his last 10 opponents. But where the catch-22 parallels the two fighters is a simple fact that Crawford is supposed to be the superior boxer in this style matchup, while Spence, who is known to break fighters down strategically, should be considered the knockout artist. Now, whether that's actually a testament to Spence's boxing skills or a sign that he doesn't really have one-punch knockout power is yet to be a verdict. On the flip side, could Crawford not have gone the distance in years actually be proof in the pudding to how special he is, or will that come back to haunt him come fight night if he can't stop Spence? If so, maybe we see Spence showing his boxing scholar and dominating in a beautiful but boring shutout, or maybe we see Crawford being the one to gut the fish and break Spence down the same way Spence breaks everyone down and the way experts have been trying to break this matchup down. The possibilities are endless, so please don't be surprised if it's Earl maybe catching Crawford with something big late in like the 11th or 12th round, preferably a body shot due to an accumulation of body shots throughout the fight, backing him into the ropes, or Crawford doing a number and collecting Spence's eye midway through, maybe going down the stretch with Spence being stunned. I mean, because this fight could look anything like Triple G vs Canelo trilogy, hopefully not De La Hoya vs Trinidad, but Charlo vs Harrison 2 or Mayweather Maidana 1 at minimum. And if it's anything like Hagler vs Hearns, Hearns and Leonard, or Leonard Hearns, well then, that means it's really anybody's ball game, and a win or lose, we will indeed be getting our money's worth. Shit, at this point it could be Gamboa vs Crawford, Mikey vs Spence, or Rocky IV. We just don't know, man. And if it does go the distance and is a complete blowout, get ready for controversy from the judges and do not rule out the draw. Knockdowns and blood would only be a cherry on top if it does end up being a 12-rounder. Alls I know is this is a motherfucking journey we about to go through. Levels, peaks, and valleys, baby. I'm here for it all. Terrence Bud Crawford walks around with a chip on his shoulder and feels that no one ever gives him or his coaches any credit. So can Bo Mac's boy show himself to be the real-life Hercules, getting the job done against the numero uno over at Derrick James' stable of Monstars? Can Bud be the first ever two-time undisputed champion in boxing history? Will Earl the True Spence Jr., who has never been undisputed, finally get his hands on the last piece of the puzzle that he's worked his ass off for to acquire, set himself apart and become one of boxing's most decorated at a time where everyone seems to think he's just a flash in the pan? We all know what happened to the last fighter who was only one title away from collecting that Infinity Gauntlet. Just saying. Will there be a man down this strap season, or will there be a fish fry for Debbie Crawford's birthday on July 29th? Gotta order it on Showtime pay-per-view this Saturday. Earl Spence Jr., Terrence Bud Crawford. Hope y'all ready, because it's time for these boxing soulmates to go out there and become legends. Pop off.
What do you have to say to everybody that's betting against you?
Put your money on Terrence, then put your house on Terrence, then if you think I'm gonna lose the fight.